Welcome to the Moon Baby Magic Podcast, a space to honor women's rites of passage stories. From menarche to menopause, the initiations of womanhood all live within our wombs. We are here to reclaim the sacredness of all of them. I'm your host, Natalie Elliott, birth keeper and women's coach specializing in womb wellness and hormonal healing. Ready for slow and sacred storytelling? Let's dive in. Hey everyone, it's Natalie. Welcome back to the podcast and happy December. Here we are and the last month of the year. I kind of can't believe it, and I feel like I say that every year. Just like when it gets darker outside and it's like, wow, it's crazy how it gets dark at 4 p.m. now, and it happens every year. Um, and I've just been really reflecting on this time of the year. And I shared this around Samhain at the end of October, beginning of November, as the descent into darkness. And I think it's important for us, especially as women, to know that this part of the year where things start to get darker and we start to go more inward is right. It is being in right relationship with what is happening. And we will go through many of these periods, both seasonally within our menstrual cycles, right before menstruation and during menstruation, and just in different seasons of life where we are initiated into darkness. And the darkness isn't wrong. The darkness isn't bad. The darkness isn't evil. And in fact, without the darkness, we would not be able to see light or know light. Without winter, we would not appreciate spring. Without our follicular ovulatory robust energy, or rather, without our menstrual um, luteal deep intense energy, we would not be able to appreciate the robust energy that we get in our follicular phase and into ovulation. So just reminding you that if things are slowing down, if things are starting to feel unimportant, that that's part of the design and things will rebirth again. So reminding you to just take your time. And if you would like to go deeper on all of this, know that the Cyclical Living Circle membership is here for you. This is the space where the women who are interested in this podcast and the themes that we explore here are hanging out with monthly calls, Wild Woman Book Club, a forum where we explore topics like this, as well as more practical topics like charting your cycle and all of the goodies that everyone wants to know about. And you can always find the link for that in the show notes. And anytime you join, you get a free week. So I recommend doing your free week around the 13th of whatever month. So that would be coming up pretty soon, so that you can join our flagship Cyclical Living Circle call, which is on the 13th of every month. Yeah, and then if you'd like to go deeper on getting in tune with preparing for your period, you can always get your period prep guide and all the other goodies I have available for you, including some free playlists. And my Instagram account are in the show notes. All right, so today on the podcast, we have a really beautiful episode with Karlie. So, Karlie is a mother of two living on a Mediterranean island with her Polish husband, who has an important journey to share about claiming the right to birth on her own terms after initially giving her power away in her first birth. You'll hear Karlie's stories of always being a little bit ahead of the curve, starting with her first bleed at age 10, to getting pregnant at 21 despite having a copper IUD in, and the radically beautiful choices she has made to live in alignment with exactly who she is and center herself as the energetic anchor of her family. This episode is so sweet, so powerful, and I know you're absolutely going to love it. So let's jump right in. Hey, Karlie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Natalie. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited for this. So I'd love to just jump right in and ask you to share the two questions I always ask everyone first, which is where you're at in your cycle and where you're at in your life cycle, larger life cycle. So maybe start with the menstrual cycle question and we'll go into that first.
Well, I'm in my mid-luteal. I'm in my fall, and it's one of my favorite places to be in my cycle. So feels very aligned. And in my life, I'm in deep in the mothering phase.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
feel like I know that a little bit from just kind of being in your orbit, that you are really in that phase. And I think it's really beautiful. And I'm also curious. So last week I had my friend Janelle on the podcast, and she talked about a lot about like overlapping seasons. So, like, what is it like when we're in a certain life season and the world is in another season and our body is in another season? And like, how do we sort of negotiate all of that? And so I'm kind of curious now to ask you, like, what does it feel like to be in your luteal phase and the mother phase of life? Like, what is that sort of alchemy like?
I mean, I think that it's so many cycles of nature offer a lot of balance. So even with many different plates spinning, let's say, in a way, it creates more wholeness for me in my perspective. So in my luteal phase in mothering, it's a real invitation to slow down, to tie up some loose ends, so that I can be super present with my children and invite them into those kind of rituals that need to be done anyways. Um, I always find like that energy in myself often sets the tone in the house as well. So like I see like this natural reciprocation in my children from silly things like just putting their toys away when they're done, like, okay, we're finished with this, let's set this away, to maybe some more artistic and philosophical things. But yeah, that's what that looks like for me right now, and keeps it dynamic.
Wow. Okay. I love that. I love that they're just picking up on the energy of it.
Yeah, it really is like that. And I think the more I tune into that, the more they seem to drop into that, if that makes sense. So I'm playing with that right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's I think the gift of it is like when we embody this ourselves, like the girls and the boys too, the children just in general, like they see it. And so I think that's a big thing with this work, like being an embodied woman. It's not just for you. It's like you are modeling the norm for your children. And I think that's so beautiful and inspiring.
Yeah, you're really the energetic center point in the home as the woman, I believe. That's my experience. And the more that you anchor into that role, then the more power it really wields.
Okay, yeah. Tell me more about that. How do you feel you've become and you are the energetic? What did you say? Energetic
What did I say this time? Anchor, maybe?
anchor. Yeah. Yeah. Tell me more about that.
Um, yeah. Let's see where to start. That's a pretty complex and fun deep dive, but definitely one that I've been playing in the last couple of years, especially. And I think part of that comes from just exploring radical self-responsibility as well, and just recognizing that my children and my husband mirror me, and if I allow myself to be the heart of the home, there's a lot of response in that, in me claiming that power. So that could work either way. It's like when I'm really centered, it's like, wow, okay, like people are being respectful of people, my children and my husband, like the close people are
Yeah.
being really respectful of, my boundaries. They're offering help because I'm asking for it, like all of these things. And then vice versa, when I really feel ungrounded, I see that reciprocated in many ways. My children are arguing more, just bickering, or sometimes this might feel a little out there, but like things in the house are breaking like on their own. I'm like, what is going on? And then I'm like, okay, I need to recenter into myself, and then watch the energy also kind of come back into equilibrium.
That makes so much sense to me because, you know, your family probably is looking to you to be sort of their sense of safety. Like, is everything okay? If mom's okay, everything's okay. Right. And like, I think that's what we talk about when it's like, you have to actually tend to yourself sort of first as a mother.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like no one else is actually going to be tended to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a really deep desire sometimes as women or just people for someone else to go first. You're like, okay, you be good so that I can then lean on you to be good. And I feel like as a woman, it's powerful, but specifically as a mother, like to really be like, okay, I'm gonna go first. I'm gonna take this big leap and I'm gonna do what needs to be done to hold my own energy, hold my own frame, and yeah, see where everybody else can then uh, orient themselves around me.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm,
I think this taking radical responsibility becomes like sort of, I guess, not necessary because some women don't do it in motherhood. Um, but I can imagine that although it's sometimes harder, like over time, it makes things go a lot smoother if you are taking responsibility for yourself. And that is the sort of blueprint that your family has. And yeah, I love that.
it's so fruitful. Yeah, that's all I can say. It's super challenging,
Yeah,
but
I'm
it's
sure.
but it's so fruitful. Yeah.
How old are your kids?
My kids are 4.5, nearly 5, and just turned 2. My daughter just turned 2.
Oh, so sweet.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to travel back in time a little bit with you. Um, and where I really like to start is at the first bleed, Menarche. So that first
Mm.
rite of passage that really, I think honestly, the more I interview women, the more I'm like, it really sort of sets the themes that show up then later in like every rite of passage. So I'm curious what you
Mm.
remember from your first bleed and what that time was like for you.
Yeah, I remember the very first indication that that was a rite of passage I was stepping into was so much pain for about 2 days prior to actually bleeding.
Mm.
And I didn't know what it was. I'm not the story where people are like, I thought I was dying and I didn't want to tell anybody, like that's not my story. But there was like this level of concern of like, wow, this is hurting so bad. What's happening inside my body? And I was young, I was 10 years old.
Oh,
So
wow. That's really young.
it was really young. And I think because I was so young, it wasn't something that someone had really sat down with me. It was like it wasn't shielded from me, but at the same time, it wasn't like, hey, this is something that's going to happen to your body. Let me explain the processes. This is what you can expect. Um, I think everyone just assumed they had a little bit longer to have
Yeah.
those conversations.
So what is that? Are
Uh,
you in like fourth or fifth grade then?
yeah, I was in fourth grade.
That's so young.
It was really young. And I
Wow.
mean, who knows, but I was definitely the first one that I knew, or that was, I might have been the only girl cycling in that class, very
Yeah.
likely. Um, And I feel like it was kind of indicative of just who I've been my entire life. Is like I was always too old for like behaving too old for my number, my age.
Yeah.
So almost like that fits in with it a little bit. Mm,
I was almost, this is kind of silly, but I was going to be like, oh, you're the alpha womb.
something like that. Let's claim that. Maybe I should put that on a plaque.
Yeah. Anyways, please continue.
Yeah. To make it a little bit more confusing, let's say. My parents were separated, so I was with my dad 1 week and then I was with my mom 1 week. So I was with my dad when I started bleeding, and there was a lot of discomfort in that. The fact that he knew that was happening with my body, the fact that my mom needed to tell him, this is what's going on, this is why she's hurting, this is what I'm suspecting. Um, just being in that space with him, it felt very uncomfortable. All of a sudden, like facing my womanhood as like his little girl, it was just a very,
Wow.
very disruptive dynamic.
Mm.
And yeah, and once I started bleeding, the pain went away, and I don't even really remember my periods being painful after that. I'm not entirely sure why my first bleed came with that mark of intensity. Um, My mom created a basket for me though. So it was kind of like this, the message was, hey, this is something that's going to be happening, for pretty much the rest of your life. And it's pretty awful, but welcome. You're part of us. And, like here's a basket of chocolate and books. And you might be kind of cranky and bitchy, and that's all right. You're allowed to be bitchy. That's like the fruit of this season. So just tell your friends you don't want to talk, take your Sudoku and go find like a quiet corner of the playground. And that's okay for this week. And
That's so
that's
cute.
that's what I remember. And so the little basket had like a comfy t-shirt and a major pack of pads and some like books and candies and I don't know, little other things. It's like this is special, but it also sucks.
Yeah.
It was kind of like I think it was pretty modern, like pretty middle, if I could say that. It's like
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
not a ton of shame, but certainly not celebrated. It was like, this is what it is. Learn to live with it. Welcome. Um,
And what
but
was like
yeah,
your interpretation of that when she gave you the basket and kind of talked to you about it? Like, do you remember sort of how you felt internally about it?
I remember feeling there was a slight sense of initiation, I think, if I could. That's obviously not what I would be thinking at the time, but when I look back, there was this sense of like, oh, okay, there's something I'm stepping into that's
Mm.
like my mom, that's like these other women that she was sharing the stories of. Um, and it separates me from even my friends. Like it's a different phase. And I really did feel that with this basket.
Mm.
um, and I think that sense of how I shared that I was always kind of above, or
Yeah.
not above, but like
Like,
around the curve ahead. Yeah, exactly. I think there was a sense of me that liked that and kind of
mm,
identified with that. I don't know if maybe this was the first time I felt that or if that was already
mm,
something that was in my story, but I think I attached that feeling of like, okay, I'm the leader. I'm treading
mm,
this path in my peer group, and I get
mm,
to figure out what this is for me first.
mm. That's so interesting.
Hmm.
I've had someone else on the podcast, my friend Alex Dahl, and she had like almost the exact opposite experience of like always feeling behind and being the last one. And I just think that, and it started with her menarche because I think she was in high school when she began bleeding. And I think it's so interesting how like this early patterning can like create, like I said, this theme. And I know you said you're not sure if it started there, maybe started earlier, but I think that our rites of passage sort of amplify these things. Um,
Absolutely.
so as you continued bleeding, like, did you feel like you were carving out a certain path, or like, how did you relate to your blood and your cycle? Did you relate to it? What was that like for those early years?
I think that there was a lot of, no, I know, I don't think, I know there was a lot. What I'm clear on is that there was a lot of uh, feelings of shame and secrecy of like, oh my God, this is happening to my body. I can't let anybody know. Some of my earliest memories of bleeding were when I was at my dad's house and I would bleed through my underwear and he did my laundry. I like panicked at the thought of him seeing that. So I would wrap them up and I would go to like the far corner of my backyard and we had like shared a wall with like an auto mechanic shop and I would just chuck them over there just like he won't find them. Somebody's gonna find them, but he won't. Like, and I did that several times. I don't know how many, like it's a long time ago, so I'm not sure how my memory changes that, but multiple times.
Mm.
Not until I was recently reflecting on this, I was like, oh my God, somebody was finding those. Like somebody was like, there is a child's bloody underwear piled here at a mechanic's shop. Like, what is going on?
Oh.
So yeah, I think that that's a really indicative story that shows where I was at. I also remember like missing out on something. A friend invited me to her birthday party, and we were going to go to roller coasters, and I just wasn't confident enough to be bleeding and do that trip, especially because the trip was with her dad. So it's not like there was even going to be a woman present. it was
Yeah.
just too much. And so I came up with an excuse and I stepped back. And there was like feelings of like, I don't know, just a lot of discomfort. Like I wanted to go have fun and share in those that time, that together time, but also I was really just needing to be in myself and not ask for help.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. Like that first story with the underwear at the auto mechanic. It's like I want to laugh and like hug and cry with little Carly at the same time. And I always feel like this
Yeah.
when we women, I'm like, man, I just want to hug all of our inner little girls and be like, you're okay.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
you're figuring it out. It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay. And it's such an awkward time, like we're just so awkward. And
So awkward.
And I think that's part of it, right? Like awkwardness going into a new phase of life. It's like awkward stumbling into this new version of ourselves. Like
Yeah.
any baby learning to walk or caterpillar turning into a butterfly or all of it, we're like, okay, like how do I walk this path? Um,
Right? There's so many metamorphoses happening at the same time, right? There's like the inner evolvement of who you are as like becoming a woman. And then there's like also the physical aspects of not just this private bleeding, but then there's like the breasts that are growing, and there's hair that's growing, and there's body odor that's coming out. And there's just like, it's a lot to process as like a young girl, especially with the mainstream narrative that kind of is offered. Like if you're in like an average American household, like it's not that supportive. The stories that we have and the support that we have around these cycles.
right. I know. You know what? I actually don't think I've talked to many women about like the other parts of puberty on this podcast, but you're so right that like all of that other stuff is also happening. And then society
Yeah,
is like, okay, like you shouldn't be bleeding, you shouldn't smell, you shouldn't have any hair. Like,
but I'm 10 with breasts. And like I remember holding my little sister and she was crying. She was like an infant at the time. And my mom was like, "What's wrong? Why is?" And she got close to me. She's like, "Oh my God, you smell horrible. That's why she's crying. Like, here, welcome. You need to use deodorant now." And I was like, "Oh my God." Like there's just so many aspects that are all of a sudden changing that I all of a sudden need to
yeah.
grapple with and yeah, and find congruence in like who I am on the inside as well.
Totally. You're right. It is like this physical and internal thing. And I think that, it's great that your mom was able to give you like a basket and at least like talk to you about what was happening, even if it was sort of in like a not super a positive way, like it was her context, which is fine. But I think like there's a need for girls to be held really close during this time and like have everything normalized and like have someone that's like right there with them and like yeah to just like model to them like what we were talking about what you're
Mm,
able to do with your children right now is to just like model cyclical living and I have no doubts that when you do have a daughter, right?
I do.
Yeah, I have no doubts that when your daughter like comes into this time that like you're going to be right there with her
Hmm.
and like telling her it's okay that she feels awkward about like
Yeah.
whatever period product she's wearing and you know
Yeah. I
uh,
find that so exciting. Like I look forward to that with great glee.
yes. I know. I feel
Like,
like all of us women like want a daughter just so we can like do that.
and we're rewriting it for our own inner girl too. It's
Yeah.
like yeah, it's that reparenting through our own parenting.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Well, what sort of like feels like it comes next on your story after these like early cycling years?
Hmm. Well, a lot happens between, but with my womb, I think there was a big shutdown from from that place.
Mhm.
And lots of other little experiences that we collect along the way. There wasn't a lot of honoring of that space of my body, despite being in pretty esoteric, new age, open minded groups. The
Mm.
womb specifically wasn't something that was revered in my circles until
It's such a
much
missing
later. It's what?
it's such a missing piece. I talk about this all
Yeah.
the time because like I got into like yoga and Eastern spirituality like from a pretty young age, like 16.
Yeah,
And like I was super into all of it, but like I had no idea I had phases of my cycle or like I wasn't
exactly.
tracking my period even. Like
Exactly. No, it's so disconnected. Like I tapped into birth control for a moment there when I was 15, like the pill, and quickly decided that that was not something that was sustainable for my body. Thank God I had enough embodiment at that time because I know it's easy to just do as you're told. And I was like, this is not happening.
what did
So
what did the pill like what made you think this isn't going to work for you?
I remember just feeling really gross in my body, and I don't know if that was like a physical. I'm probably gained a little bit of weight,
Okay.
if I remember correctly, but also like then you're more busty, and that was already
Yeah.
something that I was a little um yeah, self-conscious about.
Yeah.
I also wasn't very like I'm not type A. I'm type B, so like to remember to take a pill every day, I was like, this
Yeah.
doesn't feel like it's working for who I am.
Yeah.
Um, the costs are way more, yeah, detrimental than what I'm gaining.
Yeah.
So I dropped that,
Nice.
thankfully.
Yeah.
And then my next encounter with contraception was getting an IUD when I was 17. And I went with the copper IUD, and I really felt like I was making a choice that was the most natural, that was the least harmful to my body. Um, I had this misconception that this was nothing, that this was like, oh, this is a physical device. It doesn't do any of all that negative stuff that everything else does, which, as you can tell from my tone, that's not that's not something that I'm still in alignment with whatsoever. I've really had a both education and an embodied experience of that not being so. Um, and so that kind of like teased me off to being 21 years old
Wow.
and going. So I've had my IUD for 4 years at that point. Um, I'm trying to figure out who I am. I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing on this earth. And I
Well,
go,
21-year-old fashion.
yeah, totally. And so I buy a plane ticket, as we do,
Yes.
and I'm on my way to, Southeast Asia, as we do.
Yes.
And I'm really having this experience of solitude, of holding space for myself and my intuition to decide like what comes next in my day, what comes next in my week, what comes next in my life. How do I want to be when nobody around me is mirroring what they expect me to be?
Mhm.
So it was really like this liberating time of my life, very
Yeah.
short, but very liberating. Did tons of journaling and more meditation than I probably ever did in any other season of my life. And got just like felt like this like clear channel. I just felt so wide open. All the while like praying in all the ways that we do, for show me the next step. Like
Mhm.
what's next? Please, I'm begging for some guidance. Who am I here to be? What am I here to be? And in this like walking, traveling prayer, I meet a guy and uh, really didn't think much of it. He was very sweet. I definitely felt safe around him and really grounded, which was like a nice surprise. And I think we crossed paths for like 3 or 4 days before he was on to the next leg of his trip, and I was on to the next leg of mine. And we exchanged numbers, and he was like, if you ever find yourself in Poland, ha 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 ha, let me know. Like maybe we'll meet up another time of life. And I was like, ha ha ha, yeah, Poland sounds good. Will do. And then about 2 weeks later, I texted him and I was like, what if I found myself in Poland in approximately 3 weeks? Just what if? And he was like, oh my God, okay. Like, then my door is open. And I was like, okay, cool. So that's how my trip evolved from like a Southeast Asia trip to then a European trip. And I think it's worth noting here that I had a really regular cycle always, especially this time of my life, like solid 28 days. And I had missed a period before I met him. And I thought that was
Mm.
so strange. Like it just, my cycle stayed the same. So it came back exactly when it should have the next month, but I just skipped a period. And I did obviously find it strange, but also I was like traveling, I was eating new foods, there was so much going on that I was like, okay, my body's integrating something.
Yeah.
Um, so when I went home 5 weeks after spending in Poland or in Europe together, and I was missing my period again, I didn't really think much of it. I thought, it's the travel, it's getting reacclimated, it's the jet lag. And after talking to one of my friends several times, like, this is so strange. I'm just still not bleeding. And she's like, take a pregnancy test. I'm like, I don't need to take a pregnancy test. I have an IUD. That is 99.9% effective in all women. And she's like, just take a pregnancy test. And I was like, ha ha ha. Okay, I'll do it just to like humor you. And there I was sitting in my mom's bathroom, not expecting the two lines that I was seeing.
Wow.
And I learned I was pregnant with my son.
Wow.
So um, there was like this, just like I just came apart. I just came apart at pieces in so many different ways because I had always wanted to be a mother. That was probably the only thing I knew in my entire life that I wanted for sure in this life. And yet here I was at the cusp of motherhood, of this choice, really. And I felt like so much victim consciousness, honestly. Like it felt like my choice of becoming mother was ripped away from me. Like
Mm.
this this idea of what I thought it was going to be, the experience I thought that I was going to have of becoming mother, of what that buildup looked like, of what that reveal would feel like in my body, like, oh my God, I'm carrying life. Like it all just fell through the floor.
Mm.
And instead, I was like, holy shit, my entire life is changing in this moment. And I have absolutely no fucking clue what it's going to look like on the other side.
Mm.
And I remember just kind of going out to the mountains outside my mom's house, and I was just sobbing and I was sobbing. And I was like, why? Why are you making me do this? And like this voice clear as day was like, this is gonna be different. This is gonna be okay. And that it just was like, I don't know if you've had those moments. There's only been a few times in my life, but it's just like voice of God. Like there's no other way to say it. The voice of my spirit child. I don't know. Like it's this divine guidance. It's like it's the final word, okay, I'm gonna be okay. All right. That's what I needed to hear. And I could like get up off the ground and be like, okay, one foot in front of the other. We're gonna do this. So called my boyfriend from halfway across the world, like, hey, that 99.9% effective contraception I was on, it didn't work. So that was an interesting conversation. And then, both of us just really stepped into this curveball. We were like, okay, plot twist, let's make this work the best we can. And I feel so blessed that that's the kind of partnership that, our stars aligned for that to
Mm.
happen, because I know that that's not necessarily how it could have gone. It could have gone a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And he's my now husband, and we have two children and live a beautiful life. So that's a really happy, I won't say ending, but definitely path that
Wow.
I get to own.
Oh my gosh, Carly, I had no idea that this was your story. This is so fascinating. I am just like over here listening to like your epic tale with so much yeah, like awe in awe of you because Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think totally normal to fall apart when your life doesn't go the way that you think it's going to go. Like I totally know how that is. And um especially when you were what, 22 at this point?
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
just turned 22.
Yeah, like gosh, I think of myself at 22. I was also like traveling the world and that totally would have rocked me. But you're just like, okay, you're gonna like feel what you need to feel about it. And then like thank God you have this sort of spiritual life and sense of
Mm,
openness and connection to yourself and to the divine that you're able to sort of like metabolize it and even hear, like you said, the voice of God and
mm.
find peace in it. Because I think, and I'm sure you had your fair moments of this, but it's easy to just like spin out and stay in that victim consciousness.
Absolutely. I remember my mantra and like what I shared with my partner as well is like if we are doing this, if we are saying yes to this experience with everything in me, I'm choosing to change this to celebration right now. This energy needs to go quickly from holy shit to oh my God, how wonderful, because that's what I want my child to feel in the womb. That's what I want him to be, or them to be graced with. We didn't know he was a boy, but so that was kind of my guiding star. I'm like, you know what? Babies are always blessings. Like even if right now this feels terrifying, we're gonna make this happen, and this is a celebration of life.
How amazing to make that shift internally, I think about, yeah, I just think about how easy it would have been to stay in the like, oh my God, because it's almost like a similar energetic state to be in like, and to be in joy,
Mm,
because they're both like sort of a high vibrating energy, but to like shift almost like the mindset of that energy to make it the celebration, I think is a really beautiful gift that you gave to your family.
thank you. I won't lie, it was a lot of oscillating.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But it's a choice to always like return to what you want to kind of infuse into your experience. And that was what I was really with every fiber of my being trying to let my baby feel. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what happens? Like, do you move to Poland? Like, what happens in your
Yeah.
family?
Yeah. I'm like, okay, we're moving to Poland. I need to get to know my baby daddy now. So I move in to Poland and spend about 3 or 4 months there, just watching my body change and yeah, getting to know the father of my child in a deeper sense and laying the framework for, what we imagine our life and our family to be, because these are certainly not questions or conversations we were having with the first 3 weeks of getting to know each other. Um, and then I went back to California to birth because I wanted to be around familiar faces and
Yeah.
familiar languages and being held by my own community.
Yeah.
Mm, and this is another interesting aspect of the story is that I was giving birth. I was my quote unquote due date that was assigned to me was March of 2020. So little did I know there was going to be a global lockdown the week I was birthing as an international couple. So that was like this funny, when I look back, it's like this funny foreshadowing of like, it's not over yet. Like you think you have things figured out, but no, 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 no.
Was he there?
Yeah, so he came the last month
Okay.
because, of visa purposes, he could only
Right.
stay in the country for a certain amount of time, and we knew we were going to stay my postpartum
Okay.
in California. So he came a month before the due date,
Yeah.
and and I say due date because I was within the midwifery system. I first had a home birth midwife that I felt really close, uh, yeah, close to. And I didn't really lean on her much when I was in Poland. Like I didn't have any checkups and I felt really confident with that. I just knew that my baby was moving and that I felt healthy and vital. So that was enough for me. And
Mhm.
then once I was around 7.5 months and I was back in California, I had these little voices. My mom was one of them. My now husband was another. That sound like my grandmother was like, "This is your first baby. Why don't you maybe just consider looking into some of the birth centers? Like maybe there's a way that we can all get what we want, kind of was that's not the
Oh,
words, but that was essentially, like, and I felt so strongly about home birthing
yeah.
and or but I didn't really have a home that I felt like was home either. So this kind of added to my openness to explore other options because I couldn't really imagine myself super comfortably birthing in the apartment that I was living in at the time. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, my mom and my partner are my two biggest support people in that room. And if they're nervous, I'm an empathic person. I'm going to pick up on that and I'm going to
Yeah.
internalize that in my birth process. So this was the other thing that made me a lot more open to be like, okay, let's go see. And
Yeah.
the first one that I went and saw was in a hospital. So it was like a birth center, but a
Oh,
hospital wing. And I just remember crying and crying and crying after I got out of there. Like it was just so sterile. And the
God.
idea, it was so scary. Like it was so far from what I could ever imagine birthing, an
Yeah.
environment that I could birth in. And so I think that because I did that one first, when I went to this next birth center, it was so warm and inviting. It was so different than the sterile environment of the hospital. It was like a separate building that was their own, yeah, their own environment. They had like two bedrooms and comfortable furniture. It felt like a home of some
Yeah, a
sort,
lot of them do.
yeah. And so I remember when we were getting the tour and she was like, it's like birthing at home, but at our home. And I remember that landed so well with me and just the stark difference of the two options I just had. I was like, oh my God, like, thank God this exists. It's not like you're asking me to birth in this other place. And
Yeah.
I'm using this language because that's what it felt like. Again, I was pretty into victim consciousness at this time. I
Mhm.
was like, oh, you're making me do this because this is what you want me to
Mhm.
do. So therefore, I
You
must do
have
it
to
to
do
make
it.
you
Yeah.
happy. Yeah, it was like very much in that realm. But I did feel good enough that I was like, okay, I'll switch care to here. That's all right with me. And I really recognize that as maybe the first domino. I'm sure it was
Mhm.
before, but for me, that's the point where I'm like, that was the first time I really gave away my power in a big, big way. In that birth and or in that process. And so the birth came, and as birth does, rocked my world, broke me into pieces, like shattered me into oblivion. And um, yeah, as a maiden, I had no. Well, let me rewind a little bit. I was doing all the things I thought I was supposed to do as a natural birthing woman. Like I was totally into the holistic approach. I was like reading Ina May's books, so I was super prepared, right? Like I was so prepared for birth. And as we all know, there's no preparing for birth. Like you just walk into the fire. And I think that the only thing that can prepare you for birth is birthing once, because then there's nothing that can prepare you for that
I
portal,
love that.
like then
That's good.
so so yeah, I was walking in with so much confidence, and I had a lot of mirrors, like my grandmother, who was like a lay midwife at one point in her life in the 70s, and all these people like, you're gonna do so well. Like, don't you worry, this is gonna be easy for you. Like, they were just pumping me up, and they were saying these beautiful words that had the sweetest intention, but really set me up for this yeah, unrealistic expectation for who I was going to be within my birth. And I also had no idea how intimate birth was. And that sounds so
Mhm.
silly now, but I had 22 people in my room. Like I invited my whole family. I was like, sure, grandma, you can come. Hey, aunt, do you want to come? I had like my three sisters, my three little sisters, my mom, my best friend, a photographer. Like there was literally over 20 people. My grandpa then popped in, another pair of
No,
grandparents stopped by because they heard I was birthing. Like everyone was there.
girl,
And
that is crazy.
it was insane. It was insane. Three midwives, like it was just ridiculous. And it's really hard to get everyone to be not even respectful, but how do you create the environment that you're needing while you're in your birth process with that many energies at play. Like, I
Yeah.
was
It's
just so
like,
naive.
well, and it's like, I think we learned this in RBK school. Someone calls it like a party birth or whatever.
Yeah,
Like, you have a party
exactly.
birth.
And that's what the midwife said when I was saying, like, oh, can I have these people here? They're like, yeah, we do party births sometimes. And then, like, when we were there, they're like, we've had party births, but we've never had a party birth like this. Like, the men were in like the side room eating pizza and cheersing beers. Like, it was just so insane when I think back on it.
No.
Yeah, it was
Well,
really
you didn't
crazy.
know. Like, I feel like it comes from such pure intentions. And I could see if, I could even see myself in that a little bit because I'm like a very social, extroverted person. I've got a lot of friends, a lot of family. Like, I could see being like, yeah, it'll be great. This is a big moment. And then you
Yeah.
get up close and personal with birth, and you're like, this is very private, actually.
You're like naked, legs spread wide with your like two grandfathers in the room. Not exactly like the environment for letting go, you know?
Oh.
So that was wild. Um, and my son came vaginally after 24 hours on the dot of birth. And I remember sitting on the other side of that, just decimated. Um, he was born vaginally, but I wouldn't say naturally because of the environment. And also, they offered me nitrous oxide, which is something I said I didn't want. But then in the midst of it, that changed because I
Yeah.
felt like I was just breaking open. And he was in that quote unquote wrong position. So we needed to turn him and I had a cervical lip and we need to break my water and. So I it is the cascade of interventions that I was presented, but I'm very lucky that it wasn't to the degree that we all know it can be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I'm thankful for that. And I'm thankful for the lessons that came from that birth. And I remember sitting on the other side of holding my baby after coached pushing, after not feeling at all that the urge to push. He came out after this like dramatic, you need to get him out right now, or we need to do something else. And I was just broken and I was just felt no joy. And I just saw this little creature in my arms and I was like in love with holding this small, tiny, uh, yeah, precious being. And yet there was so much disconnect to my entire experience. And I remember like everyone was kind of like doing their thing, tidying up the space. And I just was like, I'm never going to do that again. And they're like, what? I'm like, and I said, like, with so much conviction in my whole body, I'm like, I will never do that again. And they all laughed at me and they were like, oh, honey, they all say that with like just dripping and I don't know, like righteousness almost. And I didn't even really know what I was saying at that time because I knew from the time I was a girl that I'm going to have many, many children. But what I now know that was coming from like the core of my being was that I was never going to experience birth like that ever again. So that was my conviction that I took from that birth. And
Well, I just want to pause for a minute because, I mean, first of all, yes, I love that you had that conviction and that you spoke it out loud. Like, it's just such a beautiful representation of like how in tune with yourself you are. And
mm,
I love that. But it's also really interesting for me to think about that and that they say, like, oh, everyone says that. But you and I, being in a world of sovereign birth, like, we know of many women who, right after giving birth, say, I want to do that again.
yes, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. That's the narrative, right? And it's the narrative that continues to get spun. So my little sisters were in the room when that was said, and like, what does that plant in their heads?
yeah.
That's how these things just progress. So yeah, I never did that again. I have another child and I hope to have more, but I'll never do that again.
Yeah, I mean, this is your maiden to mother story. Like, who do you become after this birth? Like, how does that affect you?
It takes time. And there were so many other factors in the world and in my life. So when my son was 4 months old, we went to Poland, which was no easy feat because I wasn't allowed in the country of Poland as a
Oh,
non-resident during global lockdown. There was no flights to Poland. We had to get like some super fancy government charted like rescue flight coming
Whoa.
from New York. And then it's just like a little funny side bar, but like I had mastitis when I was getting on that plane. And so what does mastitis do but give you a fever? And where at all the checkpoints are they checking your fever? And I'm just terrified that they're not going to let me on this plane and they're going to like leave me alone with my infant in New York City when of course I live in California. So it's already like, yeah.
Oh my God.
And we get to the checkpoint and they're like, you're not getting on this flight, ma'am. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, you're not a citizen. And my now husband had to step in and be like, no, 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 I've talked to the government. Like it was just a really volatile time for everybody in the world, but for
Yeah.
my story too. And then I was pretty secluded. Like I had nobody in Poland besides my partner. And
And did you
my
speak the language?
no, still to this
Yeah.
day, do not.
Wow. That's a lot.
It's a lot. And my parents, I mean, nobody could come see me because Americans weren't allowed. And my partner couldn't go to the US because he was not allowed. And it was just like this really isolating time in my life. I mean, we were literally in quarantine for 4 weeks of that time as well. So, like, isolating in the sense that I couldn't leave the apartment with my infant, but also just, yeah, not having my support system. It was really easy to lose my sense of self and my sense of values when nobody around me was there to like remind me my power or who I was, who they knew me to be, which can work both ways, right? Like I was saying earlier in my story, like I was traveling and there was nobody there to mirror who I am or who I'm supposed to be, because that's liberating. But then also in these times of turbulence, it's really nice to have someone look at you like eye to eye and be like, I know your heart and this is you. How does
Yeah.
that feel? Is this something that you really want to go through with? And so I made a lot of choices in that early mothering phase that, yeah, that I have to sit with, for the rest of my life. And that's okay because it's my story. And I learned so much from it. So through this, I, I had to learn a lot of self-conviction and I had to just like kind of be forged in the fire. And when we started talking about having another baby, I wanted to do it completely different because I felt like I didn't get that choice with my son. Like he just like came in like a shooting star. I was like, here I am. I'm forging this family. So I was really excited for this process of getting to choose.
Mm,
Uh,
yeah.
and then that's what I did. I kind of went on this conscious conception journey that a lot of people now, yeah, choose to experience.
Yeah.
And I did so much womb work. Like that's when I really dived into my womb work.
Okay,
Um,
yeah, tell me about that. I'm really curious what you did.
I like I stacked it on. I was like everything. So I did steaming for the first time. I met with a steam practitioner and got like my full detailed uh recipe, and that was
Wow.
like an insane experience that I didn't really when you hear people talk about steaming, they're like, yeah, that sounds like a crock of shit. You're like, try it. You'll
I know. Well,
see.
it is like initially, I always talk about this. That was like really a big part of my womb awakening, initiation, healing process too. And it's like it hits you hard when you first do it. Like
Whoa.
everything comes up.
It blew me open. Like I didn't know what was going on. I was like, this cannot be from these herbs below me. Like there's no chance this is real. But it
Yeah.
was. It was definitely my experience. And I cleared out so much, so,
Mm.
so, so much. And I also worked with a naturopath and I worked with an acupuncture. I felt a lot more grounded in my sense of health and vitality this time and like what I wanted, because with my son's pregnancy, my first pregnancy, I really quickly alchemized a lot of um, just challenges around food and body. Like immediately, it became about nourishing myself and growing a human baby. And like any of that fad diet culture that I had been totally saturated in before, it just flew out the window so effortlessly. I was like, nope.
Love
I'm
it.
like, unsubscribe. This is
I
not
love that.
after like,
You're in your mother phase now, it's such a different
yeah.
place. Like I'm not there myself, obviously. I'm still in maiden, but like from what I understand from studying this stuff, it's like there can be a lot of overthinking in maiden. The element there is the element of air, right? And there's this like, who am
Mm,
I? I'm figuring it out and whatever. And then in mother, I feel like there's, it's fire. There's this energy of just like, yep, and this is what I'm doing.
yeah, absolutely. And it
Yeah.
happened like right as I got pregnant with my son. Like I added in meat like immediately, which
Nice.
I had not had it for like probably a year and a half. I never
Yeah.
said like, oh, I'm vegetarian, oh, I'm vegan, but I had a dairy intolerance and it was easy to cut this and I feel clearer and I feel lighter if I don't. All
Yeah,
of
we
this.
do it. We all do it.
Yeah, exactly. That was my face. And so that just went out the window. And then with my daughter's pregnancy, with my second pregnancy, I I healed my dairy intolerance. I
Wow.
just got super nourished. I started eating beef liver for the first time. Like I just went really ancestral and
Love
was
that.
like, how will it feel to be so nourished in my body?
Mhm.
But I'm kind of skipping around. That's when I was pregnant. But the conscious conception part, the part that I want to tap into here, I mean, there was even just a lot of intuitive stuff. So I did a lot of intuitive movement, a lot of intuitive massage, just like feeling what my body wanted and needed. I do have like a massage therapy background, so there was some kind of education in that, but really it's just like yeah, an intuitive practice of feeling your own body in many different ways and moving your own body. And then I would kind of create my own rituals. Like if I could just get space alone, it was so wild, just like the shaman that would come out of me. And
Wow.
I would be like making noises, like releasing noise from my womb and like just tears and just letting it come up and not trying to make it something or this is what's being released or this is what I need to go in and
Mhm.
heal. Or
Yes.
it was just like, I just want to clear myself. Like whatever needs to come out, come out. Whatever needs to come in, come in. Like I'm just trusting divinity to know what my body, my soul, my next baby need in this moment of this phase of life.
I think
So,
that's so important and such a beautiful. It reminds me too again of the maiden to mother shift. It's like I feel like in maiden, there's a lot of like, like you said, you were journaling, like you were doing all this like
mhm.
intentional self-reflection of understanding sort of the mental aspect of it. And then you
Yeah.
get into this like fire of motherhood and it's like it's just going.
Yeah, it's so true.
I
It's
love
so
that.
true. And finding ways to do it like in small little bite size. Like when you're a maiden, like I said, I was literally journaling for 6 hours sometimes. Like that was something that I was able to do. That does not exist in
Yeah,
motherhood, you know?
totally.
So like my beginning, yeah, my becoming mother all over again, it was a lot different, the capacity that I had. So these needed to be potent exercises that I was doing. And
Yeah.
that means that it needed to be aligned with who I was, not this like framework outside of myself that's like, this is how you do this. Like, I could do that. And maybe if I did it for a year and a half, I could get somewhere. But what I needed was like this, I don't want to say quick fix, but just like this very aligned, like shortcutted, like, this is what's meant for me right here, right now. Let's
Yeah.
just be fully in it in this
Yeah.
2 minutes that you have, you know?
I love that.
Um, so a lot of that. And then it's funny because then I was like, okay, I'm ready to conceive after like a full year of like connecting with my spirit baby, like doing all this very conscious conception-y stuff that we all are kind of familiar with now. And then I didn't conceive like my first try. And I know that this might sound really horrible for people that are like trying over and over again, but like I was like, oh my God, it didn't happen. Like, and I just was like, if it doesn't happen now, like maybe it won't happen in a year. Oh my, like I really expected, especially with like all the openness and connection I had for like it to be there, you know?
Yeah.
And so I was a little devastated. And it was really interesting because the week that I did get pregnant, the next month, two things came into my field. And it was the bioenergetic food, so like very much ancestral eating piece.
Mm.
And I listened to the Free Bro Society podcast for the very first time. And in that week, once I found those two pieces, I had conceived. And so for me, that was really like this message from my baby, my next baby, that was like, this is what I need to be in your field for us to be a match for this life to flourish. And it was kind of scary at first. Like, I remember hearing about free birth, but never interested before. I was like,
Mhm.
yeah, that's some crazy shit where people just like, I don't know, open their legs in the forest and pop it. Like, I don't know what that is. Like, not even interested, you know? like it's so holistic I am, I'm like, But when I listened to this, I cannot tell you. Like, I think I did 10 years of therapy in that like 1 hour of listening to the Free Birth Society in that moment. Like, all of a sudden, my birth and what I was feeling made sense. I was like, oh my God, this is not just my story. This is an experience that is shared with other people, because I just felt so confused when everyone around me was like, what are you talking? You had a beautiful natural birth in a birthing center. Like, you had the holistic birth of your dreams. But I'm like, maybe on paper, but that's not my experience at all. So why do
Yeah.
I feel so much disconnect? Why was it so hard to feel these very innate feelings of motherhood, and like, what's wrong with me? What was wrong? Like, what's going on? And yeah, 1 or 2 episodes of listening to Free Birth Society, I was like, oh my God. Like, it just all alchemized and it all made sense in that moment. And this like clear message was like, yeah, mama, this is how I want to be born. Like, this is the path that
Ah.
I'm putting you on. And that scared the hell out of me, because I was like, what am I going to tell people? Like, how am I going to make this okay to everyone around me? Like, will I be okay? Will you be okay? Like, all of these very, let's say, reasonable questions, when we're
Yeah.
talking about free birth, from the current narrative. And so as the pregnancy progressed, it was really just about, what do I need to do to drop into my body, to be the authority of my experience, and to know what I need in birth from the inside out. And that looked like a lot of dancing, a lot of intuitive movement, a lot of like ritual in my day to day. So just like creating space, little things, lighting a candle as I walk over to play with my son, or making myself a cacao before we sit out on the porch and get our morning sun. Like, just these small, very actionable steps. Um, like, one of my mantras was like, because you always hear consistency is key,
Yeah.
and that wasn't it didn't feel accessible to me, like being consistent on all these things every day or every week. But I was just like, if I can do one nice thing for myself every day, one thing to anchor into my body and anchor into like my baby, then I'm winning. That's consistent enough for me. And sometimes that looked like one deep breath, like one really like present deep breath, and that was okay with me. And I think giving myself permission to be like, that is enough, was radical, because I'm kind of an extremist and I think that I need to be doing all the things all the time. And when I don't hit that standard, I feel like a total failure. So giving myself that grace was like, yeah, it changed the game for me.
Well, I love that too because like you said earlier that you're not a type A person. And so like perhaps doing the same thing every day just like isn't actually right for you. And so I love that you have like this self-knowledge, self-awareness to just be like, yeah, like the day and the connection to your intuition to know, what the right thing is for that day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important. And yeah, I think that it's what it always comes back down to, is like, what do you need? Not what everybody else thinks that you need, but what
Yes.
do you need? It's so simple and everyone says it, but it's like, it
It's
just should
really
be said over and
profound.
over. It is, because it's one thing to say it and to think it and be like, oh yeah, that's for sure true. And it's a whole other thing when it drops in the body and you're like, oh yeah, that's what that looks like. Okay, I'm gonna stop trying to put their story into my body, because that's why it's not working. So yeah, and then again, that fire that you're talking about, it really blazed. So
Mm,
I was like, I'm not living in Poland anymore. Like, I can't do this. This is not where I'm thriving. This is not where my family's gonna thrive. We need a change. So we like took a weekend, or no, a week vacation to the island of Mallorca, like off of the coast of Spain. And my husband had always kind of like joked about like, what if we moved to Mallorca? And I was like, that sounds like some like I don't know, like super touristy trap. I don't know. I'm not interested. And the second we landed, I was like, why did I ever say no to living on a Mediterranean island? Like, what was wrong with me? I sat through 3 Polish winters being like, Mallorca. I'm like, what was I thinking?
so
So right
funny.
away, I was like, yeah, let's do this. Let's do this now, because I do not want to be with an infant and with a toddler stuck in an apartment in a Polish winter. And like, this is just not what
Yeah.
we need to thrive. So let's make this happen. Whatever we got to do, let's burn it down. Let's build something new. And when I was like 8.5 months pregnant, I was on the island alone with my son while my husband was packing up our place, and I was trying to find us a place to live and so that I could birth in it like that week. I'm like, we need a place
Oh
now.
my
Hi, thank you.
gosh.
And when everything lines up, it lines up, and it was super intense, but like the perfect spot dropped in for us. And it was so interesting because I was part of the Free Birth Society membership at the time. And one of the things you could do is do these village prenatals that were online. And they
Hmm.
would guide you monthly through what you saw at your birth. And I always saw this birth with like a fireplace in a certain place and this like long set of windows in the kitchen there. And like no
Hmm.
matter all the other aspects changed, but like that layout always stayed the same. And it was raining in that vision, and that's not what happened, but everything else was the same. When I got into this house, I didn't even realize it because obviously it wasn't the same house, but it was like a week before I was birthing, and I just like, oh my God, there's the fireplace. There's these holy shit. Like this is what I was imagining all
Oh.
along. It was just this really sweet moment of confirmation that like I
Ah,
had just been following the pings, I'd been following the signs, and like here I was.
that's amazing.
Whew, yeah. And I guess the other important part, there's so many different things I could go dive into, but the other important part of this story is that my husband was not at all in any way, shape, or form on board with a free birth. So
Wow.
that was really a point of tension in the whole pregnancy,
Yeah.
um, as you can imagine. And I
Yeah.
remember listening to the podcast a lot and like hearing these women that were like, but it's my baby and in my body and my experience. So I said like, well, either support me or get out. Like, like this is what's happening. And I was always like, like that
Yeah.
doesn't resonate. Like it's the father of
Yeah.
my child. Like I want this to be a respectful, equitable choice. Like I want us to all feel safe and choose this experience.
Yeah.
Um, and when push came to shove at 39 weeks, I was that person that was like, "Hey, baby, I love you, but I can't. I've tried all pregnancy long. I can't convince you to get on the same page. This is what we're doing." And
Mhm.
he was kind of like, "All right, well, then I guess it's said and done." So there was more of like this sense of
Yeah.
like giving up more than like getting on board.
Yeah. Well, like, what did he think at 39 weeks? You were all of a sudden gonna hire a midwife. Like,
Well, well, it's funny because we had danced around like hiring a sovereign. Like she had RBK in her,
oh,
and
I
she
see.
didn't go through the Freeburg Society school, but she like considered herself an RBK. She was never like licensed.
Oh,
She free
okay.
birthed her own babies. So we talked about having her in my space.
Mhm.
And the more I sat with it and the more that I just interacted with her, I knew without a shadow of a doubt I wouldn't be comfortable with her in my space. So that was like, I was so excited to find her because I felt like it was like this best of both worlds. This
Yeah.
like, you can feel safe. And I told her, like, look, I want to do this on my own, but my husband's really worried. And she's like, cool, I can be the dad doula. And I'm like, that's what I need, the dad doula. And, but just like, the further it got along, I was like, this woman is not in resonance with me. Like, if she is in my space, my mind is going to be somewhere else. And that I know without a shadow of a doubt is not the ticket to a healthy
God.
outcome.
One best
So
of
that,
both worlds, like you tried best of both worlds in your first birth. And like, it's not really about that. Like, yes, you want to respect your partner. And like, I'm not about like get on board or get out either. Like, I think having a
yeah,
respectful conversation. But at the same time, I am about like, it's not really anyone else's choice but yours.
exactly.
You
And
are
that's
the
what
you
it
are the deciding vote.
Absolutely. And that's what I had to find in myself. It's what I always like wanted to believe, but it's a different than like embodying it
Oh,
and
yeah.
demanding it from everyone around you. Like, I mean, my mom and my grandma, like earlier in the pregnancy, like told me that I was just naive and stubborn, and I'm going to try to prove a point, and what's that worth? And like all of these stories, that we hear, all these reasons people keep their birthing choices private when they choose to have a sovereign birth. Um, and I have a really alternative family. So the fact that my family, like, I'm like telling my grandma, I'm like, you're telling me that you need someone to do like intermittent fetal scoping, but you never had anybody. Like, you were delivering babies in the middle of the boonies. Like, who are you right now? Like, what is old age doing to you?
I mean, I think it's just how culture sort of transforms and then shapes us as it transforms. But
Yeah, and even my mom has reflected. She's like, when I was birthing my babies, I was never scared. She's like, but watching you birth your babies, I'm terrified, you know? So it's interesting. Like, I don't know. I don't know what exactly that is. There's probably many different threads that came into that. But ultimately, I went into labor at 3:30 in the morning on Halloween day after like chanting, I will not give birth on Halloween. I will not give birth on Halloween. I will not give birth on Halloween. And
so
so, of course, my daughter comes on Halloween morning, and it was just an incredibly, beautifully intense 5.5 hours. And I say intense, not painful, because it was exactly that. Like, it was just so powerful. Everything in my experience was so powerful. And yeah, I had no, I was trying to convince myself that it could be 72 hours. Like, that was what I was telling myself over and over. Could be 72 hours. Nobody get excited. I'm not giving birth on Halloween. But then I was dropping to my knees to have a contraction. And I'm like trying to cut mango. And then I'm like,
no.
ooh. And I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna go like lay down, like have my space. And my husband's like, yeah, that's a good idea. And I had written him this Google Doc that was like a cheat sheet for the stages of labor. Like, this is just
Oh,
so you
so
know,
cute.
like, this is what this might look like. And so he like would come in and pop in and check on me. And he's like, this seems to be going really fast, don't you think? And I was like, no, 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 baby. We've got like another 48 hours. Like, I can do this. We got another 48 hours. He's like, all right. And he like popped back in. He's like, this seems like it's progressing. And I was like, no, 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 no. Like, we've got time. Like, don't get into my head. Like, we're gonna be doing this for a while, you know? Because I didn't want to psych myself
Of
out.
course, yeah, better to think it's gonna
Um,
be longer.
but it's funny, he told me afterwards, he was like running back to the Google Doc and like checking, and he's like, she's in stage 3, like, this is what's happening, like, this baby's coming. And I was like, no, no, no. I'm just opening, you know? And I remember there was a moment that he came in and he held me, um and I started like I had a lot of back labor, and I did my first birth too. But my first birth, it really broke me open. Like, I just didn't know what to do with it. And this birth, I was really hoping to not have back labor, but I did feel sensations in the back, and they were intense. And I was more nervous that it was going to continue to build and build and build for the next 48 hours that I was going to be birthing.
My gosh, yeah.
So I had this moment of just like crying. And he's like, what's going on? And I was like, I have back labor. He's like, well, you've done it before. And I'm like, I know, and I'm gonna do it again. I just didn't want it to go this way. He's like, okay. It was a really tender moment. And then
Mhm.
like that was my transition. Like, that little breakdown like was transition. And I remember after that, like, he walked away and I dropped into the deepest squat, and like my entire body was open. And I hopped into the bath just to put the shower head, like the hot water, on my lower back.
Yeah,
I'd been on land the whole time.
yeah,
And like I had this moment of deeps, like the whole birth was like deep squats. That was my position. And I had this really beautiful imagery of like the earth underneath me, and like the core of the earth like pulling, like magnetizing my baby out. And I felt like my whole spirit body like rising up. So it was like this, like pulling sensation like in my whole like psychedelic experience.
wow.
And that was the moment that she like crowned, like all of a sudden her sack was there, and I called, I'm like, Philip, because I knew he was gonna miss it if he wasn't there. And he was like, oh my God, what is that? And I was like, it's her sack of waters, because it was bulging. My water hadn't broke yet.
Oh,
So
wow.
I tore the bag with my hands, and once that water was broken, her head was right there, and he was like, already? I'm like, here she is. And I think it was like 3 more pushes, and she was in my arms. Just it was just so I could never say easy because birth is never easy, but I
Yeah.
was blown away by the power and somewhat ease that being in alignment with my physiology allowed for me to open up and have this process. And I just look at the side images of my face after birthing my daughter and my face right after birthing my son. And it's really interesting because the ones with my son are also in black and white,
Um,
ironically. So it's almost like one of those bad infomercials, but it's like me like crying and like looking like despondent, like holding my baby with like gloved hands all around. And then it's me just like in color, the biggest, brightest smile I've ever seen on myself in this photo, and just like holding my baby girl like in amazement. I'm like, I did that. Like that was all I said. I was like, I think the first words I said was like, it's over. It's over. Like, how is it over? Which was also my same words that I said after my son was born, but it was like, it's over. It's over. Thank God it's over. So it was like, it was just really this interesting duality, this like side by side comparison of what two experiences could be like. And I really feel like that was because I followed what my heart needed, what my baby was asking of me. And I really didn't let that path falter. And that takes a lot. Like I had to do a lot of inner work. I had to become a whole new woman to let that happen. And I'm just so grateful for the experience and I'm so much better for it.
wow. I'm just like kind of reeling in the enormity, like the energy of birth is so vast. And so even just
Mm,
hearing your story, I feel so like sort of in the ethers of it. And I just love this thread of like how you've learned to trust your inner voice and follow that. And it even reminds me of the conversation we were having at the very beginning of like being the energetic anchor of your family.
hmm. Yeah,
It's you rooting into this, no, this is what I need, so this is what's best for us.
yeah,
And that creating this like beautiful birth outcome. And I've seen your birth video because you shared it with some of us.
yeah.
I remember your face. Like that's one of my favorite birth videos ever because I remember your face
Mm.
and it's just like, I mean, it can make me cry. It's just like, it's so special to see that rite of passage like be so joyous.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like what an imprint to like bring your child into the world with, and what an imprint to like re-imprint your maiden to mother journey with.
Mm.
Um,
And my
yeah.
daughter just like she really shines that light, like her face is sunshine. And I have no doubt it has part to do that I didn't none of the choices that I made through the birth, through the pregnancy, dimmed that light of hers. I think that was always her light, but none of those things that she had to go, like she didn't have to go through any of that a lot of babies do have to kind of endure before they even reach Earthside.
Yeah.
And so I'm really proud of both of us for allowing that to happen.
And for
And the
that,
fun part is my husband tells everybody about our free birth now. He's
that's
like,
amazing. He's fully converted.
yeah, yeah, he's like, why don't you just like stay home? Who cares? Like just like very flippant about it. And he
That's
and he's even told me like, well, I was like in California, and he was like, yeah, I met some new people. I showed them your birth video, and I'm like, you just popped up my birth video at like a picnic. Who does that? He's like, well, you're cool with it, right? I'm like, yeah, I guess.
that's so funny.
It's pretty funny.
And I mean, like, that's the kind of birth video people should be seeing. So, oh, wow. So, yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
want to ask you just like, after your first birth story, I said, this was your maiden to mother initiation. Who do you become? And now I'm curious, like, who you become after this second initiation into motherhood.
Mm. Definitely a more radiant woman. Definitely a woman that's not scared to speak her truth and trusts that inner knowing that we all carry. Um, And yeah, then I met you the next spring because I had signed up for the Radical Birth Keeper School because I just want to help spread this. Actually, I signed up before at my birth. It was like 3 weeks before my birth. So this was
Oh,
already the path that I was wanted to walk no matter the outcome of my birth. But yeah, so that like really just also helped ground me into what sacred work that this is, just being with women, sharing story, how letting women have an open ear, like a truly open ear, just to like explore their own inner choices and their own inner desires, curiosities. So I feel like I don't know anything else, like anything more than I did before, but I feel like I fully trust everything so much more, if that makes sense. Like I don't need to know much more, at least in this realm, to feel like just like full trust that babies come the way that they want to. Mm, and yeah, I think another piece that I really share, despite having a really redemptive free birth, um, I tell people to really evaluate why they would want a free birth. I have several friends that have done it. I've had several friends that have thought about it and not done it for whatever reason. And I think that is the fact that it's becoming trending. And a lot of people are hopping in with the idea of like wanting to be part of a club or share a
mm,
story. And they're not doing it from a place of like dropping into their body and knowing that this is right for them. And yeah, and just like aligning with the path ahead, if that makes sense. And I feel like that's when things can get a little wonky because ultimately, like the power of birth being safe is that the mother is in charge and in power of herself and in tune with herself.
yeah.
So I think it's just an important piece to say when we're talking about free birth stories. I don't want to like inspire the wrong person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I love that. And I love that that's like part of you answering like who have you become? Because I think it's like you made this choice from being very deeply connected to your body and your truth. And like the choice to free birth came from that place. And so it's like the advice for women isn't, or like advice, I don't know, it's such a weird word, but like the yeah, whatever advice is like
Yeah.
not just free birth willy-nilly, but like get in tune with your body and see what your body asks of you. And that is a
Mm.
deeper path than just doing like what the trendy sovereign thing is.
Yeah.
Um, but that's the path that brings you to the right situation for your personal growth. And I love that.
That's true liberation, right? It's true
Yes.
liberation is feeling what you need and then seeing that that's exactly what you needed on the other side and being like, ah, I knew this was for me. And it really doesn't matter what path that is, as long as like you tapped into your inner knowing and then you followed through and saw it through to the other side. Like that's just this beautiful relationship with self. Like you're cultivating trust within your own self and cultivating, yeah, a deeper intuition.
Hmm. Oh, Carly, gosh, it's dropped so much wisdom already. Yeah, I mean, I shared with you before we started recording, the last question I always ask is for women to share if there's a piece of womb wisdom that they'd like to leave with the women listening, what might that be?
I think what my womb wants to share is just to invite women to move wildly, move ferociously, move your bodies, see what comes up, see what you can shift. Like I feel like that's the biggest piece of medicine I can share. Move intuitively. I think that there's space for all sorts of movement, but just that really untethered expression is so important for the womb to really like flourish and move energy and bring up what you need, the wisdom that you need from within.
Yes, I love that. I was just talking to someone about that at the gym today, about like just the
Yeah.
importance of moving at all.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so much, Natalie.
Aw, yeah. Well, I'd love to give you an opportunity, Karlie, to share where women can find you and if there's anything you're offering or whatever wants to come up on that front.
Yeah, I'm in a little bit of a hibernation stage of offerings as I get a little bit clearer on exactly what that container is going to look like. But I would love for people to follow that path. And you can find me on Instagram at wild.karliekoval. So it's KarlieKoval. And
Okay.
yeah, that's where you'll find me. You can join my Substack or yeah, follow
Mm.
any new things.
I didn't know you had a Substack. I'm gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, Earth and Mother. It's gonna get a
Yeah,
revival here soon.
oh, that's exciting. Yeah, well, if you're listening, Karlie is a really amazing writer, so definitely check out her Substack. Oh, all right, Karlie. Thank you so much for being here. It's been such a delight and honor to hear your stories and just like the deep intuition and wisdom that just seeps out of them. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me into this space. This has been so much fun. I've got like sore cheeks from smiling and laughing the whole
Me too.
time.
All right. Thank you for tuning in to the wisdom of the womb today. It's truly an honor to bring these stories forward, and it would mean so much to me if you'd rate and review this podcast so that it can reach even more women. If you're looking for deeper support, you can find the link to book a one-on-one virtual session in the show notes. See you next week.